Welcome to the Korea Now podcast. My name is Jed Lea-Henry, your host, and on today's show we have Donald Kirk, a veteran journalist who's worked in conflict zones from Iraq to Afghanistan, Cambodia, Laos, Indonesia, Vietnam, and many other places. In 1972, he came to Seoul, South Korea, since which he has worked and covered the assassination of Park Chung-hee, the Gwangju uprisings, and the democratic movement in general. He's worked for the International Herald Tribune, the New York Times, and Forbes Asia. He's also a Fulbright scholar, has been the Edward Murrow Fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations, and has received an honorary doctorate from the University of Maryland. His books on North and South Korea include Korea Betrayed, Kim Dae-Jung and the Quest for the Nobel, Korean Crisis, Korea Witness, and Korean Dynasty. It's an absolute pleasure to have him on the show today, and without any further ado, this is Donald Kirk. Donald Kirk, welcome to the Korea Now podcast. So you first came to Korea in 1972 on an assignment to deal with the Red Cross talks. And you mentioned back then that you were talking about the exact same issues that they still are today.
Yes, the issues were out there, family visits, commercial ties, mail, all those things. One issue was not out there, and that's the nuclear issue. We did not know about North Korea's nuclear program. That was not on the table, and of course that has made a tremendous difference. When you say that the issues were the same then as now, yes they were, but for the nuclear problem, which is overwhelming the confrontation between North and South Korea.
Yes, and at that time in 1972, you met Kim Dae-Jung and did an interview at that time, and of course you call him DJ in the book. So if you want to call him DJ right now, it's fine as well.
Right. DJ may seem a little informal, and it may even seem disrespectful, but DJ was the term in Western lettering in Korean newspapers. You'd see this Hangul writing all over page one of the Korean newspaper, and then there would be DJ in the headline. So if they can do it, I can do it. Yes,
yes. And when you first met him, I mean, you've written 2 books about him since, and some people consider him to be quite skeptical. But when you first met him, you considered him to be quite an impressive person, at least as a human rights campaigner and democracy campaigner.
Yes, he was the hero, really. And I think most of the Western press, all the Western press, really revered him more or less. Everybody wanted an interview with him. He was sitting in his home in Mapo-gu, Seoul, and he was available for interviews and gave interviews. So indeed, I was impressed with him.
And those early days, so you met him after that again during the Gwangju uprising, when he was at least convicted afterwards as being one of the key conspirators or instigators of the uprising.
Yes, I met him. I met him again after his kidnapping from Tokyo. He was going to the States and he was kidnapped from his hotel room in Tokyo, spirited back to Korea. So I met him after that. This was well before the Gwangju uprising. He gave me a great interview then, told me all about the kidnapping experience, as he told many others. And I saw him probably once or twice before the Gwangju uprising. And then he was imprisoned while Gwangju was going on. After he was out of prison, I saw him again in the U.S., when he was in the U.S. So I probably interviewed him half a dozen times over the years.
So just for people listening, that kidnapping from Japan would probably sound like quite an extraordinary thing. So what was the purpose of that, and how did it come about?
I think it was a remarkably heavy-handed attempt on the part of Park Chung-hee, the Korean dictatorial leader for 18 years and 5 months. A remarkable attempt to try to shut him up. It's believed that they wanted to assassinate him. They wanted to dump him into the sea between Japan and Korea. But there was intense pressure from the American embassy, from the American ambassador, Philip Habib, and from Donald Gregg, who was head of the Central Intelligence Agency in Seoul, to free DJ. So DJ was not thrown into the sea. When he got back to Korea, he was taken to his home and placed again under house arrest.
And then you met him again in Harvard in the 1980s, where he was writing papers and working at the university, though you said that he wasn't actually on campus very often.
Actually, where I met him, he was at Harvard as a visiting fellow there. I met him in Northern Virginia, in his home and business and residence business office in Northern Virginia, where he seemed to be spending most of his time. And I interviewed him then, right. I interviewed him then, and I interviewed him before he returned to Korea.
Okay, so from this impressive human rights campaigner, democracy campaigner, and of course he becomes president of Korea at some point, the big thing about him, and of course the core point in those two books you wrote, was the Sunshine Policy. So just for people listening, what exactly was the Sunshine Policy?
Well, the Sunshine Policy, by the way, it's a term from Aesop's Fables about a man who something to do with a man who picked up a coat and somehow was spread the sunshine, spread the warmth rather than the frigid air around him. The sunshine. That, by the way, that's a rather disjointed version of the Aesop's Fables. Sure. I'm just trying to remember what it was. But the Sunshine Policy was a Sunshine Policy of peace and reconciliation with North Korea. Rather than confront North Korea militarily and with angry words and with rhetoric, let's have relations between North and South in which people go back and forth and in which we have family visits. This culminated in the summit, the first inter-Korean summit between the leaders of North and South Korea in June 2000, when Kim Dae-Jung went to Pyongyang and met Kim Jong-il, the North Korean leader who passed away in December 2010. He met Kim Jong-il, and they came out with a joint statement and an agreement on family visits and much else. That was the culmination of the Sunshine Policy. Now, since then, the Sunshine Policy has definitely not worked out as planned, as hoped, but it was the policy throughout the DJ administration and also the presidency of his successor, Roh Moo-hyun.
So would you say the Sunshine Policy was effectively an idea where you put off hard issues for later, and at least immediately you just focus on becoming friends and improving the relationship?
Well, you do focus immediately on becoming friends and improving the relationship. They also aspired to deal with hard issues, and they did deal with some hard issues. But then the family visits have been few and far between. I think we've had about 20 of them. Thousands of people have passed away, of course, whose families were divided during the Korean War, and thousands are left hoping that they eventually might see their relatives up north, and the North Koreans, no doubt, hoping to see their relatives in the south. But it's an exercise in frustration, and very sad, actually, that, frankly, I have to blame the North Koreans for making a political issue out of this, such a political issue out of this, when they should have just gone through with family visits every week, every month.
So in those early days of the Sunshine Policy, when you begin to, at least from what I gather, to not turn against Kim DJ, but to at least reassess him a little bit, you said it kicks off quite badly when immediately the South Koreans released 200 people in South Korean prisons. And DJ never asked for 500-odd South Korean fishermen who are imprisoned in the north, who still haven't returned today.
Yes, I think that the number who went from south to north was somewhere in the 60s. I didn't think it was as high as 200.
You might be right there.
It was somewhere in the 60s, and they were released and permitted to go to North Korea. I'm not sure that all of them really were enthusiastic about going to North Korea, but they were such pro-North people that they had to behave enthusiastically.
Yep.
So they went to North Korea. DJ did not bargain for the release of more than 500 South Koreans held in North Korea, most of them fishermen captured at sea, not always inside North Korean waters. The North Koreans said they were inside North Korean waters. Some of them were captured outside North Korean waters. So none of them were released. DJ didn't demand their release as a condition for, or the release of any of them, as a condition for releasing the North Koreans who were held in South Korea.
And this heavy price that DJ was willing to pay to keep the Sunshine Policy alive continued. There was skirmishes in 1999 and 2002, and even at one point a mini sub arrived on the east coast of South Korea.
Yes, that was quite an incident, and it could have been the sort of incident that would really destroy the Sunshine Policy, but DJ made the most of it. He more or less papered it over. certainly he regretted it, and he blamed the North for having perpetrated this incident, but he did not let it stand in the way of continuing the Sunshine Policy.
And you're quite critical of Kim Dae-Jung for not advocating for the human rights and democracy of people in the North. Of course, he was there's a bit of irony there, I suppose, as an individual who grew up under an authoritarian government, who wouldn't stand for it, who fought against it, and then criticized foreign governments like America for at least tacitly supporting that authoritarian government. He wouldn't speak out against, or he wouldn't speak out for North Korean citizens to have their own rights to be free from dictatorship.
No, Kim Dae-Jung's emphasis was on human rights violations in South Korea. He was a strong crusader for the rights of South Koreans who'd been mistreated, badly mistreated in quite a few cases by President Park Chung-hee and also by his successor Chun Doo-hwan. So DJ was very much an advocate of human rights concerns in South Korea. He was not an advocate in North Korea. What he said was, well, we have to improve relations with North Korea. We have to settle the problem with North Korea, and then we can get to the issue of human rights in North Korea, which doesn't do a lot of good for the people held in North Korean prisons. In the first place, none of them knew what DJ was doing in South Korea. In the second place, people who were suffering and dying in North Korean prisons would not be comforted by DJ's promise after relations between South and North were normalized. After that, we'll turn to the issue of human rights in North Korea. That indicated a dual outlook on his part.
Yes, and staying on this point of the cost he was willing to pay to try and produce some sort of reconciliation, you said at one point about $500 million, maybe more, was sent to North Korea through the Hyundai Dynasty, which you wrote a book about.
Yes, I wrote that book, Korea Betrayed, Kim Dae-Jung and Sunshine, several years ago. I got quite a lot of information about that. The 500 million or so was transferred through Hyundai Asan, the Hyundai Group company that was responsible for Hyundai enterprises in North Korea, including construction of railroads to the Kaesong Industrial Zone and to the Mount Gumgang Tourist Zone, and including operation of those zones, actually. So the money was transferred through Hyundai Asan. Chung Ju-young, the Hyundai founder, the empire chief, delegated his son, one of his sons, he had a number of sons, Chung Wong-hun, as the person responsible for Hyundai Asan. And so after Chung Ju-young passed away, still Chung Wong-hun was very much involved in relations with North Korea. Finally, there was a terrific investigation into all of this, during which Chung Wong-hun very sadly committed suicide, jumping from the 14th floor of the Hyundai headquarters in central Seoul. Yes,
and one of the things that DJ was critical of, or at least somewhat, was the US. So at one point he meets George Bush and is quite, well, he meets him for help and assistance and comes back quite critical of the meeting and thinks at some point that the Americans and Bush undermined his Sunshine Policy.
Well, yes. DJ, after George W. Bush's inauguration, DJ went to Washington and saw Bush in the White House shortly after his inauguration, a couple of months later. And Bush used the term skeptical about Kim Jong-il, North Korea. He said he was quite skeptical of Kim Jong-il. He did not offer full support of the Sunshine Policy. This was embarrassing, if not humiliating, for Kim Dae-Jung. However, shortly after that, President Bush made a visit to South Korea, in which, in the Blue House, I saw him. I happened to have had a pool position in the Blue House. I saw Kim Dae-Jung and George W. Bush standing side by side in the Blue House, talking to reporters. George Bush advocating the Sunshine Policy and speaking for Kim Dae-Jung. After which, President Bush went to the newly built railroad station. It's Dora Station at the end of the railroad line before it goes into North Korea, and again spoke for the Sunshine Policy, signed his name on on a railroad tie, which is on display there, in which he made a statement in favor of reconciliation between North and South Korea. Kim Dae-Jung was not placated by all these gestures. His failure to get through to George W. Bush in their initial meeting to convince him of the Sunshine Policy very much upset him, as he indicated in a later interview with me.
And you mentioned at some point that you consider DJ to be, though, quite a brilliant person and also quite a strong political opportunist. And later on is a period that most Koreans are very familiar with, where two American soldiers run down and kill two young Korean girls. And you say DJ played politics over this.
Well, he did, in the sense that there was terrific demonstrations going on every day about this in Seoul. This was in 2002. This happened while World Cup was still going on. World Cup 2002 was still going on in Korea. And it wasn't until after that these demonstrations mounted in ferocity in central Seoul. So every night, thousands, sometimes hundreds of thousands of people would be demonstrating in central Seoul. And the U.S. command had put these two Americans who've been on this armored vehicle on trial in a military court-martial, and they were let go. They were freed. They were not held responsible. The two girls apparently had been listening to music and stuck in their ears, walking on a narrow road down which this military column was approaching, and the huge armored vehicle, a 48-ton vehicle, was almost on top of them before they even could see them. And they just ran right over them. They were terrifically upset by this and terrible incident. And Kim Dae-Jung didn't speak out at all in an effort to calm down the demonstrators, to say this was an accident. Of course, he wouldn't say that. He simply criticized the American operations, as did many Koreans. There was no doubt, by the way, it wasn't the fault of the two guys on the armored vehicle, but there was no doubt that there should have been an advance vehicle going ahead of that column, making sure the road was clear. They should have taken, the Americans should have taken much better precautions to make sure this narrow road north of Seoul was empty of any traffic before this column went down there. Certainly the Americans, hopefully, since then, have much improved how they conduct these operations. It wasn't the two drivers or the two operators of the armored vehicle may not have been culpable. They were court-martialed, they were let off, but the American command should have been much more better prepared to deal with the incidents and to make sure that no incidents like that occurred.
And of course, for anybody listening, you have actually written a book about U.S. bases in Okinawa and Jeju. But to move on a little bit here, through all of this, so just after that summit in 2000, Kim Dae-Jung wins the Nobel Peace Prize. And this is quite an extraordinary victory, because he spent his entire life effectively campaigning for this.
Yes, I wouldn't quite say his entire life, but he did get nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize 14 times, well before he even ran for president or was regarded as a possible president. He made a huge issue out of attempting to win the Nobel Peace Prize. He had his embassy in Norway entertaining influential Norwegians, giving them information and things, not overtly saying, oh, Kim Dae-Jung should get the Nobel Peace Prize, but sort of acquainting them with Korean issues. And he also did the same thing in Sweden, where the Nobel Prize organization is headquartered. The Nobel Peace Prize is given out in Norway, incidentally. It's the only Nobel Prize that's given out in Norway, the Peace Prize. He invited Norwegians to Seoul on get acquainted tours, met them at the Blue House, had them at family reunions, did everything possible. Delegated a large number of people at the National Intelligence Service, then known as the Korean Central Intelligence Agency, delegated a number of people to work on this project. A number of diplomats had to work on this project. I think he published a book, or a book was published under Korean financing about Sweden, I believe. So whatever they could do he pulled out all the stops to win the Nobel Peace Prize. One professor said that he'd been asked to write letters on DJ's behalf 14 times simply for the sake of the Nobel Peace Prize.
So you said there that he also operationalized the National Security Service in Korea. Are there any scandals about that? Because that is quite similar, at least in part, to the scandal that Park Geun-hye is currently facing.
Well, there is a certain parallel. The Park Geun-hye scandal involves payoffs from the Korean chaebol or conglomerates to her or to the woman Chae Soon-sil, who has been convicted and sentenced to 20 years. The Park Geun-hye scandal seems to me to be more serious, frankly, in the sense of payoffs from the chaebol to government contacts. Also, Park Geun-hye exercised pressure on officials, drawing up a blacklist of officials who might be critical of the government, asking officials to draw up a blacklist of people who might be critical of the government, and getting rid of officials who might be at all critical of the government. Her whole administration seemed to be focused on spreading her influence, and perhaps on acquiring, and perhaps on getting funds channeled into a foundation or two foundations run by Chae Soon-sil. Also, Chae Soon-sil, although she was not a government official, was said to have had a certain mysterious power over her. President Park actually showed Chae Soon-sil her speeches and asked her opinion of her speeches before she made them, and asked her views on government policy and so forth. When Chae Soon-sil was not a government official, should not have had such access. Long story about how Chae Soon-sil got such access. Her father had been a shaman who had been very close to the administration of Park Geun-hye's father, Park Chung-hee. Very long and complicated story. But somehow I think that the Park Geun-hye case is more serious than that of Kim Dae-Jung, although you could say, certainly, that payoffs to North Korea in order to bring about the June 2000 summit was a very serious issue.
Sure. And he wins the Nobel Prize in 2000 just after the summit. And so do you consider this so why did he win it? Was it more sort of a hope of what would come next, or did he win it for the outreach? Because it seems a little bit like an Obama-esque victory, the way that he was given the Nobel Peace Prize for the hope that people saw in him rather than what he actually did.
Well, I think actually in the view of the Nobel people who gave him the prize, I think they would say, well, no, it went back for covering his entire record on behalf of human rights and perhaps and on behalf of efforts to and reconciliation between North and South Korea. Some people think that he was given the Nobel Peace Prize just because he managed to some people think he was given the Nobel Peace Prize just because he managed to go to Pyongyang and meet Kim Jong-il for the first Inter-Korean summit, which may have been why he got the Nobel Prize, actually. But the Nobel Peace Prize people would say that it was his whole record on behalf of human rights in South Korea and on behalf of establishing reconciliation and dialogue with North Korea.
Sure. And at some point, the whole sunshine policy breaks down. Now, it continues through DJ, through to his successor, No Moon-hyun. But at some point in about 2002, it all collapses, at least mostly, at least functionally.
Well, it did collapse because the 1994 Geneva Framework Agreement, in which between the U.S. and North Korea, in which North Korea agreed to give up its nuclear program and agreed on inspections of its nuclear facility in Yongbyon by the International Atomic Energy Agency, broke down in 2002. The reason was that North Korea in 2002 was revealed to be working on a parallel effort, a secret effort, at developing nuclear warheads with highly enriched uranium. So that broke down. That resulted in the end of efforts at. Let me start that sentence again.
Sure, no worries.
It was revealed in 2002 that North Korea had a separate program, a highly enriched uranium program, under which it was working on nuclear warheads. The North Koreans firmly denied that, but the U.S. stopped sending the heavy oil that it was sending every year to North Korea under the terms of the 1994 Geneva Framework Agreement. At the same time, work stopped on building facilities for 2 nuclear power plants in North Korea. They had built the external structure of the plants. The nuclear reactors were still under construction in South Korea. They had not gone to North Korea. So that whole program stopped. Under the terms of the 1994 Geneva Framework, North Korea was to get 2 nuclear energy reactors, not reactors that would be capable of building nuclear warheads, but providing nuclear energy, which North Korea badly needs and still badly needs. But the whole deal broke down. North Korea withdrew from the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, and North Korea also kicked out the inspectors from the International Atomic Energy Agency. The U.S., as this part of the deal, ceased to send heavy oil that North Korea was getting in order to fuel its energy plants until these reactors went online. The U.S. ceased to send that heavy oil. So the whole deal fell apart in 2002. Nonetheless, Roh Moo-hyun, as president, he was inaugurated in 2003, in I think February or January or February 2003. I think February 2003, as DJ's successor, continued efforts at reconciliation with North Korea. In 2006, however, North Korea exploded its first nuclear warhead, conducted its first underground nuclear test, while Roh Moo-hyun was still president. He went to North Korea in 2007, before the 2007 election. He also met with Kim Jong-il, but nonetheless, the Sunshine Policy was effectively dead by that time.
So through 2 friendly governments, there's the building of a nuclear program and then a nuclear test, and then after that, Lee Mun-bak comes in and he shuts the whole thing down. And it continues forward to today with Moon Jae-in, and many people consider him to be an unreformed advocate of Sunshine Policy. Why do you think that is?
With Moon Jae-in.
Yeah, Moon Jae-in.
Yes. Moon Jae-in was chief of staff for Roh Moo-hyun during his presidency. And in fact, Moon Jae-in had a lot to do with arranging Roh Moo-hyun's visit to Pyongyang in October of 2007. And President Moon went to Pyongyang with Roh Moo-hyun. So he has a history of looking for reconciliation and dialogue with North Korea. And that's exactly what he's doing now. He's hoping to revive the Sunshine Policy. He doesn't call it the Sunshine Policy, by the way, but he would hope to revive that policy and hope to bring back the policy that Kim Dae-Jung inaugurated during his presidency.
So do you believe that Moon Jae-in and his followers today believe the Sunshine Policy was never given a fair chance? Or do you think it was just a faulted policy that needs some sort of reform?
Well, probably they think both. Probably they think it was not given a fair chance. And they also think probably there were flaws in the policy that need reform. And probably they hope to improve on the policy and see if they can somehow bring about some form of reconciliation with North Korea. So I would think that that President Moon Jae-in, not Roh Moo-hyun, I would think that President Moon Jae-in would look back on the Sunshine Policy as an earnest attempt at reconciliation, would hope to revive elements of the Sunshine Policy, and at the same time improve on it.
So just before we move into the spectre of the Olympics and the whole spectacle of that, you make the interesting point at some earlier in your book that you believe that DJ didn't experience the Korean War, and therefore he couldn't fully understand the fear and the animosity that some South Koreans still held towards the North for the harm done to them at that period. And at least now there's a parallel that Moon Jae-in, over the current diplomatic reach out during the Olympics, suffered his first serious dip in the polls too, as if they both don't quite fully grasp the South Korean nation.
There's a great difference, though, between Kim Dae-Jung and Moon Jae-in. There's a great difference between Kim Dae-Jung and Moon Jae-in when it comes to their military backgrounds. DJ did not experience the Korean War. He was in some kind of naval militia group down there in Mokpo, in the southwestern portion of South Korea. But actually, that group was not fighting battles with the North Koreans. He went to Pusan during the Korean War. Pusan was not overrun by the North Koreans. Pusan was really the base point, the headquarters for military operations against North Korea. Pusan was the headquarters for military operations against North Korea, led by the UN forces, the United States heading the UN command. And it was from this Pusan base that the U.S. forces and the South Korean forces pushed back and recovered South Korea, etc. But Moon Jae-in was in the army. He did serve in the Korean army as a draftee. He served up at the demilitarized zone. He was there during the famous axe murder incident when two Americans, one an officer, one a sergeant, were killed by North Koreans when they were trying to cut down a tree in the DMZ that was obstructing their view of what was of a bridge into North Korea. The tree was in what's called the JSA, the Joint Security Area.
So do you believe that Moon Jae-in has a decent grasp on the sentiment inside South Korea towards North Korea, or is it simply that maybe he doesn't quite understand the feelings of a younger generation that doesn't have the same historical attachment to North Korea?
Well, I think that Moon Jae-in is walking a tightrope between right and left, between conservatives and liberals. He himself is obviously a liberal. He's not, however, an extreme liberal. He's not a leftist. And I think that he's trying to deal with these disparate elements in South Korea. I think he has a pretty good grasp of Korean sentiment from conservative to liberal. And I think that he would like to bring about some understanding among all Koreans. May be impossible. It may not be possible to do that. Moon Jae-in, incidentally, is from Pusan, the city the huge port city in the southeast of South Korea, Korea's biggest port. That's historically and currently basically a conservative area, very conservative people there. Not the same as the dissidents from the southwestern portion of South Korea, where DJ comes from. So there's a difference in regional attitudes. That's not to say that Moon Jae-in is not capable of making huge mistakes. He may make misjudgments, but I do think that he has perhaps a different understanding of Koreans than Kim Dae-Jung, and I do think that he's looking for a broader base. Now, whether or not he gets this base, whether or not he succeeds, it's not certain. It's very difficult to rationalize between these conflicting forces in South Korea and at the same time attempt reconciliation with North Korea, which seems rather uncompromising about its nuclear program. Moon Jae-in is saying North Korea has to denuclearize. Well, I don't think North Korea agrees with that at all. So I think that it's a very difficult situation in which Moon Jae-in finds himself, and we'll see how he gets through it. If he manages to get through it, that will have been a tremendous achievement.
So what do you make of the current Olympic diplomacy? Because you've just returned from the Winter Olympics, and just the broad spectre of Vice President Pence being there, with Kim Jong-un's sister arriving as well, and all these side diplomatic meetings and joint teams.
Yes, there were two very interesting visitations from North Korea. One at the beginning for the opening weekend, the other at the closing. For the closing weekend, we had Kim Jong-un's younger sister, Kim Yo-jong, down here, a very attractive and seemingly personable young woman. I believe she's in her late 20s. Certainly made a good impression. She didn't say anything. She didn't come out with any judgments or any statements, or certainly no interviews or comments to the media. But she made a good impression anyway, while Vice President Pence did not greet her while they were both watching the opening ceremony, did not turn around and say hello or extend a hand or anything of the sort. He looked stolidly ahead. So there was that contrast. Then at the closing, North Korea sent down Vice Chairman of the ruling Workers' Party, Kim Dae-Jung. Pardon me, is it
Kim Yo-jong?
Yes, that's correct. Kim Yong-chol, excuse me.
Yeah, sorry.
Sent down the Vice Chairman of the ruling party, Kim Dae-Jung, a rather stolid-looking person, not making that great a personal impression. He's also said to have been the person who ordered the operation that sank the warship, the Chonan, in 2011 with a loss of 46 lives of South Korean sailors. And then I was responsible for the shelling of an island off the southwestern coast of North Korea, a South Korean island, in which 4 people were killed, 2 South Korean Marines and 2 civilian helicopters. Total of 50 deaths that conservatives blame him for having ordered. Now, the government says that although these incidents certainly were terrible and they certainly were carried out by North Korea for were blemishes on the record of North Korean conduct towards South Korea, they acknowledge all that. They don't say. They say, however, that Kim Dae-Jung or Kim Yong-chol?
Kim Yong-chol.
Kim Yong-chol. They say, however, that Kim Yong-chol cannot be blamed directly. There's no evidence that he himself personally ordered these incidents. So that they say that if North Korea wanted to send him to the South Koreans really had to accept him as the head of a delegation, which included also nuclear experts and diplomats. So they say that don't blame us for admitting this person into South Korea. The conservatives take quite a different view. They were out there demonstrating on March 1st, the Korean national holiday, the 99th anniversary of a revolt against Japan in March 1st of 1919. So there was quite a different impression. At the same time, President Trump sent his daughter Ivanka to South Korea, and she made quite a good impression, actually. An attractive person, seen not only in the closing ceremony, but also at several 2 or 3 athletic events, and also at dinner with in the Blue House as a guest of President Moon Jae-in and his wife. Now, Ivanka, unlike Kim Yo-jong, did talk. She did make a very carefully scripted statement in which she said it was necessary to maintain maximum pressure on North Korea. Of course, President Moon Jae-in does not use the term maximum pressure. This was illustrated This illustrated that the U.S. policy of wanting to maintain a hard line in which sanctions were actually intensified at this very time. In other words, while she was saying we have to maintain maximum pressure on North Korea, the White House, President Trump, was placing intensified sanctions on North Korea. So there seemed to be a difference in emphasis between South Korea and the U.S., as illustrated by what Ivanka Trump said and by what President Trump, her father, did in Washington. Nonetheless, it was a very interesting contrast. She made certainly a decent impression, a fine impression, as an enthusiastic and attractive person. There's been criticism of why did he send his daughter there and why should she be conducting U.S. policy? That's all domestic U.S. criticism. As far as South Koreans are concerned, she basically made a positive impression.
And sitting behind all of this Olympic spectre is also a memory, and you wrote about this quite recently, that the memory of 1988 when North Korean agent, now living in South Korea and rehabilitated, brought down, exploded a bomb on a South Korean airline. But there's also, some people have been making references back to the 1936 Olympic Games that Hitler had in Nazi Germany, and the idea of people using Olympics as either a moment to destroy things or to try and bring about a false sense of diplomacy.
Well, yes, the 1936 Olympics is a very unfortunate analogy. The American athlete Jesse Owens won a number of medals. He was a black American. Of course, the Germans were totally racist, believed in only white German, pure-blooded Germans, non-Jewish, certainly non-African. And they had to accept Jesse Owens at the 1936 Olympics. So it seems very sad that shortly after that, fighting broke out in Europe, first with European countries. The Germans invaded Poland and other places, took over Austria, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and then invaded France and then Russia. This very soon after the 1936 Olympics. I don't think that these Olympics were quite. I don't think these Olympics were quite the same. I don't think that the host government, the South Korean government, is a racist government. I think that they try to be inclusive, and I think that in their inclusiveness, they tried to make certain that the North Koreans had their place at the Olympics, and they did that. They had this unified team, and they under the one Korean flag, and they also had the combined women's hockey team, combining North and South Korean athletes. So I think that the government here is not racist, and I think that it has tried to be inclusive. Now, the Olympics don't always lead to peace, however. We could have a breakdown in this effort at reconciliation. It could come to nothing. It's quite possible this could be a high point in North-South Korean relations, which could promptly be or soon be contradicted by a low point in relations. We have military exercises that the U.S. and South Koreans are supposed to begin conducting after the Paralympics later this month. So we'll see what happens then. But I would hope that the comparison between the 1936 Olympics in Germany and the 2018 Olympics is not valid. Now, on the subject of what happened in 1988, I was here during the 1988 Seoul Summer Olympics, where there was another attempt at North-South reconciliation in which South Korea pleaded with North Korea to send the team. North Korea did not do this. Instead, months before the Olympics, they set up the explosion of a Korean airplane over the Andaman Sea, killing all 115 people aboard. The two people who planted the bomb had gotten off the plane in Abu Dhabi, a man and a woman, a young woman. The man managed to get a pill into his mouth, a suicide pill, so nobody questioned him. I believe the young woman got that pill in her mouth, but it was gotten out of her mouth. She didn't succeed in committing suicide. Instead, she was questioned closely about what happened. Her whole life was exposed. She was brought back to South Korea. She was put on trial, etc. However, she totally reversed herself, explained how she had been totally brainwashed, and in fact married one of the South Koreans who was guarding her. So she has led a married life in South Korea after having been involved in this terrible incident, this terrific tragedy.
Yes, and you mentioned Donald Trump there and these war games, so we might move on to that for a second here. You actually had a very interesting statement in one of your recent articles where you said you contrasted strategic patience of the Obama era with what you described under Donald Trump as strategic ambiguity.
Yes, I'm not sure that's my original term, by the way. I think I heard.
Yes, I think it is, yeah.
Is it my original term?
Yeah, I got it from your article.
Yes, no, I know. I mentioned in my article. I'm not sure I originated that term. But somehow, I either heard that term or made it up. I'm not sure which. But yes, there is a certain ambiguity. Whoever was responsible for that term, which I did use, there is a certain ambiguity between the policy in the policy of President Trump. He said that during his campaign, he said he'd like to sit down and have a hamburger with Kim Jong-un. He said he wouldn't mind. He said he wouldn't mind talking with Kim Jong-un. That really cannot happen, simply because Kim Jong-un has never left North Korea, and I don't think Donald Trump is going to go to North Korea to meet Kim Jong-un. I think there will be tremendous security issues involved. I'm not sure the Secret Service would be prepared to provide all the defenses necessary, and I just don't think that's in the cards. Ideally, what's also not likely, they could meet at Panmunjom in the demilitarized zone between the two Koreas. That's extremely unlikely. But nonetheless, I think that that illustrates one side of Donald Trump's policies. At the same time, at the United Nations, he called for fire and fury. He said the U.S. could bring about fire and fury upon North Korea. And he's held out the military option, including the possibility of a preemptive strike against North Korea's nuclear and missile facilities, which is quite the opposite of offering to sit down and have a hamburger with Kim Dae-Jung. So in that sense, I think the policy is indeed ambiguous. I don't think the U.S. administration quite knows where it's going on this. I think that Defense Secretary Mattis and Secretary of State Tillerson have both cautioned against any action that might bring about a second Korean War or an attack on the northern part of South Korea, including the capital of Seoul and the port city of Incheon.
Yeah, so on that similar point there, some people close to Donald Trump, people like John Bolton, for example, have put forward an idea of a bloody nose attack, of a single attack without any strategic purpose other than to send a message. And though you have to read into this, it seems Victor Cha wrote about this before becoming ambassador to South Korea, and he was promptly removed as a result. Yes,
the bloody nose idea certainly is the kind of idea that John Bolton, former UN ambassador, very hawkish American diplomatic figure, has advocated. It's also believed that the National Security Advisor, H.R. McMaster, is in favor of a bloody nose, although that's not certain. He may be losing his job as National Security Advisor anyway. And certainly Victor Cha, who's an experienced scholar and had been advisor on Korea and on Asia in the George W. Bush administration, opposed the bloody nose idea, warning of the possibility of attack on South Korea. And Cha, who's no dove, Cha advocates maximum pressure in the sense of sanctions and the sense of no doubt stopping off shipments of material that North Korea might be trying to send to the Middle East and elsewhere, and stopping imports of other items from North Korea, getting in touch with nations around the world, notably China and Russia, asking their cooperation in not dealing with North Korea. But Cha would be in favor of all these rather hardline measures, short of inflicting the bloody nose. So I think that in that sense he may have differed from President Trump, who wants to hold out all options.
Do you think there's any theoretical value in a bloody nose attack or not?
Well, there is a theoretical value, and it may be theoretical. You inflict a bloody nose, and that'll teach them a lesson, right?
Yes.
You inflict a bloody nose, and maybe they'll say, "Oh, we better stop our nuclear program." There is that theoretical value, but it's very questionable whether it would really work out as theoretically planned, and it's also theoretically possible that they could start firing artillery shells, not missiles or not nuclear weapons, but simply artillery shells from entrenched positions above the demilitarized zone.
Yes. So just to finish this off a little bit, we're going to move into some final questions. So back to Kim Dae-Jung and the ideas that Moon Jae-in is now pursuing at the moment. So when Kim Jong-un's little sister comes, Kim Yo-jong, Kim Dae-Jung comes, she gives an offer at the Blue House for a summit meeting in the future. And that is what a lot of the Korean media is now talking about, the prospect of a future summit. Do you consider there to be any value in these summits, especially considering how the previous Sunshine Policy went?
Well, if you'll pardon the double negative, I would not say there would be no value, which is a terrible double negative. I would not say there would be no value in a summit. President Moon has said that he wants to send an envoy to North Korea. No doubt the topic of the summit will come up. He's also said that the summit has to be held under the right conditions. And President Trump, by the way, has said that he too favors relations with North Korea or talks with North Korea under the right conditions. Now, what will this envoy come up with when he goes to Pyongyang? Will North Korea say, you have to stop these military exercises with the U.S., you have to call them off entirely, or there can be no summit? And will North Korea say, you have to oppose the sanctions that are causing us a lot of problems? There may be some conditions that North Korea will attach to an inter-Korean summit. On the other hand, we can't rule out the possibility that North Korea will say, well, we'll discuss all these issues at the summit. So there is still a possibility of a South Korean, inter-Korean summit. President Moon Jae-in, who went to North Korea, let me start that sentence again. President Moon Jae-in, who went to North Korea with President Roh Moo-hyun in 2007, may be going to North Korea again for a summit. However, that's far in the future. First, the South Korean envoy has to go to Pyongyang and talk about all these issues. Second, we have to get past the military exercises that both the U.S. and South Korea say are going to be held. They may be scaled down. They may not be quite as dramatic as exercises in previous years. But we have to get past them and see what the North Korean response is. We have to see if North Korea is really not going to fire more missiles and not going to conduct a seventh underground nuclear test. They may fire some more missiles. They may get ready for another nuclear test, which would make a summit rather difficult. So there are a number of variables here.
So hovering over everything that we're talking about at the moment is this idea of a nation divided and the prospect of reunification. And a lot of South Koreans will speak about this, even if they may not personally be committed to the idea in practicality. But the North, at least in ideology, speak about it all the time. And DJ at one point talked about this idea of confederation. And during the Olympics, of course, there was joint teams and they marched under a single flag. What are your thoughts on the idea of confederation or reunification?
Well, I think confederation and certainly reunification is extremely difficult because you don't know who'd be governing what. I'm sure that the North Koreans would not want to form a joint armed forces with the South Koreans. South Korean armed forces are far better, far superior in the sense of equipment, not in size, but in equipment. I'm sure the North Koreans would not want to cooperate with the South Koreans on foreign policy. I'm sure that they wouldn't want to cooperate in a number of different areas. They have to get over a number of measures before they could even come close to confederation. They've got to get family visits going. They've got to get normal commerce going. There's no normal commerce between North and South Korea. There have been trade relations over the years, virtually none now, in which it's all conducted by ship, going from Incheon to the North Korean port of Nampo, which is very awkward considering they have this long border over which no commercial traffic can move. So they've got to get over a whole lot of initial problems which have been plaguing the whole relationship ever since the Korean War. So I don't think confederation will work out. And also, I'm not sure that South Koreans are very enthusiastic about reunification. A lot of South Koreans say, well, look, let's forget it. It's okay to talk about it and okay to believe it and okay to hope for it, but it's not going to happen now. And we're leading our lives and we'd like to go on leading our lives. Yet another issue which advocates of a sort of reunification and confederation prefer to forget is there's a huge human rights issue in North Korea. if they ever reunify, what about all those prison camps in North Korea in which tens of thousands of people are held? They're made to suffer. They have very little food. They work until they die or get executed or tortured. And what about all the North Koreans who want to come to the South? There are now 30,000 defectors, more than 30,000 defectors have come to the South. The vast majority of them, incidentally, are women who come from the northern provinces of North Korea and manage to make it into China. What about all these issues? These are issues that have to be overcome first. So I think we're a long way from reunification and confederation. There still are these basic issues that have to be resolved.
And one final last question here. So the Sunshine Policy is this idea of reaching out with friendship first and then dealing with the hard issues later once you've developed a relationship or a certain amount of reconciliation. And of course, it didn't work out. But I wonder what you think of the theory of the idea. Do you think belligerent states anywhere around the world, this is the way or a possible way to engage them? And if not, what do you think it should look like? Although I know that's a difficult question.
Well, I can say that I do think that although the Sunshine Policy did not work out in the end, I do think that it would be great if there could be another era of Sunshine Policy, and if Roh Moo-hyun can pull off another era of sunshine. But I'm not at all certain that he can. I'm sure that he's trying. Again, the best of luck in this, without trying to be overly optimistic about it. Sure, you hope the Sunshine Policy will be revived, but there are a lot of problems that have to be resolved before that can happen. Of course, between states in general, I think that all states should try to, all hostile states should try to get along with each other in one version or another of the Sunshine Policy. It doesn't seem to work in a whole lot of instances. I'm thinking of Israel and the Palestinians for one long-running, festering conflict.
Yes. Oh, Donald Kirk, it's been a pleasure. People can find your work at donaldkirk.com, and I can't recommend your weekly articles enough. You've got a huge output as a journalist. You seem to never stop writing. And your books as well, I'd recommend to people listening. They're absolutely fantastic. So, Donald Kirk, thanks for coming on the Korea Now podcast.